Welcome to Irresistible You. I'm your host, Karen Seltz, and I am so excited. I have a guest with me tonight, and I had the honor of being on her podcast last week. And we had never met before, and it was like we had known each other our entire lives. And the wisdom bombs that came out of her mouth were just mind blowing. And I'm like, you have to come on my show. So I am so excited to have Donnalynn Riley with me here in the studio and, well, across the miles on Zoom, but we're together. So let me tell you a little bit about Donnalynn. She has been coaching high achievers to become the joyful, successful masters of their lives for over 10 years. She's had decades of training in health, law of attraction, and spirituality. And she's also been featured on Fox, ABC, NBC, and CBS. And she started out, she had a career in Broadway. She's been a corporate CEO. I think she's done it all. So welcome, Donnalynn. So excited to have you here.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here with you.
Well, awesome. So I was telling some people about this topic, and everyone says, I need that. So we're going to talk about joy. Donnalynn is a joy expert. And I'm so curious how, of all the things you could have possibly selected as your field of expertise, why joy?
Yeah, so that's really interesting, isn't it? I mean, to focus in that direction, it isn't really done very often. And I will tell you, I was a spiritual health coach since 2008. So, yeah, 2008. And so my experience was all with the mind and the body and how the spirit interacts with all of that, right? And then a couple of years ago, I walked through a very, very, very dark valley in my life. And as I walked through it, I realized that all that training kicked in, and I just walked through it differently than most people have to. And I thought, this is what I need to teach people, this one skill. If I just had to have one skill, this is the one that will carry you through anything that you go through. And that is that unconditional joy, how we create, nurture, and really propagate in our lives that unconditional joy. And so that's really how that came about.
Oh, yeah, it usually happens that way. People get to go through the dark stuff. And I love that you're sharing it with people, though, like what you learned throughout your entire life. Did you have one of those moments where you're like, oh, this all makes sense? Like everything I've been through has led me to this moment.
Yeah, so it's really interesting because I was married for many, many years, and my husband was a very healthy person. He was not, they'd never been sick or anything. And he got sick, and the quickness of life is so amazing. So when he got diagnosed, then I closed my practice so that we could work on his health together. And he died almost 4 months later. So and then my house sold 4 days after that. And because we were selling it so that he could live somewhere else, that's we could go to a new place. And what I realized is when you have nothing, when you have nothing left, right? You've got no work fully ahead of you, you've got nowhere to live, and you've got no primary relationship. I mean, we lived in a bed and breakfast that he ran, right? So we were really in it together the whole time. And yeah, so that whole thing really added up to me understanding that minute by minute by minute, I had to make a different choice. And so there were so many ahas along the way, right? One of the things I was after he had passed away, I only had a certain amount of time in the house, right? So I had to start packing everything up and figure out what to do with all the boxes in the basement and everything. So as I started to do that, I hired some helpers online, and got people to come in and lift the boxes and move them around. And I wore this t-shirt that said best day ever on it just about every day. And, I was a widow. So it didn't look like the best day, right? It looked like me trying to balance emotions and get a job done. And one of the guys who had been with me a really long time in that process, several weeks, one day he looked at me and he said, is it really a good day? Why do you wear that t-shirt? I said, because this is what we have. We can only find joy in this moment. It doesn't come in other moments. It's not in the past and it's not in the future, right? It's only right here. So what you do with this moment, that was a big aha for me, right? It became so literal for me, like, oh wow, this person used to be breathing and they're not, but I'm still breathing. And so what am I gonna do with this heartbeat, this one heartbeat? Am I gonna find it in joy? Am I gonna spend my attention on things that enliven me, that make me feel good? Or am I gonna waste those moments in depression? And loss brings a lot of sadness, don't get me wrong, but there's some choices along the way, and you can really move into those moments. And when you do, all those other moments change. They become different. Yeah.
Yeah, you said so much there. The big thing that really stood out to me was that you had the mindset to actually know that you had a choice. And so many people are victims, or they live as if they're victims, and they don't see the choices they have, or they fall into the A or B, right or wrong, left or right. I'm either happy or sad, and not into the richness of the all the possibilities that we have, because we have infinite choices ahead of us.
Mm,
So I'm just so curious, like, what practices led you to that, especially while you were grieving? Because
mm.
I think most people would have had the realization that, wow, I have a choice how I can live this next breath or this next moment. And all those added up, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. So I really had a very strong practice, right? So I already had all of this information about how the body works in conjunction with the mind. I had been a biofeedback practitioner, so I really understand how the body works and how the brain works and how they do their thing together. And then to really add in that spirit element, right? So the untangible, the intangible, the unknown. How do we tap into something that is bigger than us? And I think you're right. I think a lot of times we feel like we don't have a choice. And maybe we don't on our own, right? Maybe we don't when we feel cut off and we allow ourselves to stay in it. But I am one of the fortunate people in the world that has a very low tolerance for pain. And it's true. I really do have a low tolerance for it. So when I get into these situations where life is really hard, then that choice becomes very evident, because I know I'm not going to make it if I don't make a different choice. And even that really reminds me of a different time, a few years earlier than that, in a work situation, right? Where things were going on, where people were bad mouthing me, they were talking against the company, they were trying to create internal turmoil. And that person had a lot of power in that company. And I did everything. I did everything as everybody would, right? You're like, okay, so let's look up the management books, right? Let's figure it out. And then one day I thought, you know how the body and the mind and the spirit work. You're going to have to do this on your own and then watch the world change. And so that's what I did. I don't think it took me 2 weeks, but once I started internal practices, right? And prioritizing those feelings, doing the work of moving energy that is stuck in different ways, and really finding your way to something better. And 2 weeks later, that same person was inviting me out to lunch, telling me how great I was. My staff was coming to me going, "What did you do? What did you do? We want to know." And I said, "Well, do you really? Because it takes an incredible amount of personal responsibility. You have to be willing to say, I am responsible for 100% of my own experience. Not how other people treat me, right? Not other people's experience, but I am responsible for my experience. And then we work with how do the vibrational conditions that we create really change that, right? Really change that experience. So, yeah.
That's brilliant. Yeah, I learned a lot of that in leadership training. Like, I am 100% responsible for everything. And then in my spiritual practice, I would say, what I see out here is just a reflection of what's inside of me. So outer world reflects inner beliefs. And I love that you took that on. For a lot of people, I think it's difficult. We're not raised that way. We're raised to think, oh, this person's treating me badly or whatever, and to not look inside.
Mm.
And because a lot of times that's what we expect, or that's what we think we deserve. And so that's what we create. So I love that you really took a look inside and changed the internal. Can you talk a little bit about what practices you used in order
Sure.
to shift
Yeah,
your?
so I love to meditate. I am a meditator. I will say that during that period, I'm not sure I can claim I was really meditating, but I was going into an altered state of mind, and that's really what meditation is about, right? It's about slowing down, allowing thoughts to not be so important to us, and taking that time to just be for a while. And then I was, and continue to be all the time, but I was particularly um, vigilant about what I exposed myself what to when I had a choice, right? So grief it's a lot like being in the rest of your life, but amplified, right? So it will really give you this sense of like, oh, there's something happening in my body and I don't have any control. And do we experience these same things when somebody makes you angry, but like really angry, right? When your buttons get pushed, your triggers get triggered, right? The same process is going on there. But but for me, I don't try to manage those moments. I manage the moments that are easy. And then the rest of the moments change drastically, right? So those moments that are easy, where you can allow yourself to open the spaces up in your brain and you can raise the quality of your feelings. So for me, during that time period, I absolutely used things like television, podcasts, music. I used external stimuli. Now, I don't in my normal life, and I didn't in the practices before that, right? I have a strong ability because I honed it one session at a time to be able to choose in my body what I'm going to feel and then feel it, right? But sometimes you do get into a place where it's hard to do it. It's hard. You have a big loss in your life. You have a big change in your life. You go through really tough relationships with people who have power in your life, like bosses and clients and spouses and children and parents, right? All these people have a lot of power in our lives. And when we do that, then to really be able to say, okay, I'm willing to lean on these practices, not when we're having the conversation. That's a whole different set of skills, right? But when we're not having the conversation, when I'm not actively triggered, then what happens with the trigger is that it becomes smaller and smaller and smaller, and either more isolated so you can figure out what's going on, right? So it's not surrounded by a bunch of ramp up and ramp down, or literally the impact gets less and less. And that really depends on background and how deep that wound is that you're carrying around, and how tied to it you are, how willing you are to say, okay, this is a thing that I am willing to let go of in order to live a good life, in order to experience my joy, my birthright, of joy.
Yeah.
And when you say, I'm not willing to let somebody take my joy, right? It's a saying we have. I won't let you take my joy, right? To really stand behind that is something very different than just saying it, right? Because now you got to do it in those moments just before you're falling asleep, when you're washing the dishes, right? Whatever those quiet moments are, that's where resentment will rot you,
Mm,
right? That's where it gets to you. So that's where the work needs to be done.
wow. Yeah, you said so many things there that I would love for you to unpack. One of them was about what I would call secondary gain, like really taking a look, like you said, being willing to let something go. And I remember I did this trauma release program and it was in a group. And there was something that happened to me when I was little. And I got a lot of mileage out of this story. I got tons of sympathy because it's really horrible. Everybody thought so. Everyone agreed. I'm like, oh, poor you, poor you. And that trauma didn't clear. And somebody else raised their hand. What if it didn't clear? And he said, well, is there a reason you want to hang on to that? And I'm like, oh, crap. So I really got to look at it. Would I rather have this clear and not tell that story again? Or would I rather have it in my back pocket in case I feel like I'm not enough and I want some sympathy? So I call that secondary gain. Like, what am I getting from being a victim? Or what am I getting from being angrier? And it sucks, honestly, to look at that stuff sometimes. It's really painful. And in my case, I made it mean something about me, the fact that I was doing it to begin with. And was I enough without that story? Would people find me interesting enough? Would they care about me? Would they love me without that story? So, can you talk more about that? I don't know what you call it. I call it secondary gain.
Yeah, yeah, sure. Yeah, we do get things out of our wounds. Yeah, absolutely. We get there are there the things that we carry around with us, they mean something to us, right? They are serving us. They are propping us up, or they're giving us pity, or they're putting us in a position where we feel that we may not be enough, like you described, in our own brightness. So we'll diminish ourselves and see if that works, right? Now am I getting external stimuli about being okay? So the first thing really, and this is part of a process that I go through with people in terms of awareness and detachment and, alignment, right? We have a whole process. And in that, to really look at that and say to yourself, not just, am I willing to let that go, whatever that secondary gain is, but am I willing to take my value from my internal self? Am I willing to connect to something so much bigger than me that no human relationship can touch it? Am I, my inside, am I going to be in relationship with me? And that's really a big start in terms of the awareness piece, right? We talk about becoming aware of your feelings, aware of your actions. Really, a lot of times people are behaving in ways that they have no idea they're behaving in, right? And raising that external awareness, really important. But if you raise it and you don't do this piece where you switch the power into your own self, so your power comes from you and your internal self, is really different than if you could, you quite honestly, it's very hard to find internal joy and still be letting other people trigger joy, happiness, sadness, right? Anger, right? So once you can move through that process, awareness, detachment, alignment, and awe, then you're really going to get somewhere where those things, we're not going to have to even think about, how did it serve me? Of course it served you. You made yourself into this person because this is who you needed to be, right? No question. It was a valuable asset. Now it's not. So what are you going to do with that?
Yeah, I love it. I love it. So when you're working with people, what do you do? Like, what process do you have them go through to even start becoming aware of their rackets or their I call them cons. I have all kinds of names for things, but like the beliefs, the stories that are running them or that they keep telling over and over. I think we've all met people like that. They keep telling the same story over and over and reinforcing it. So what
Oh,
it,
come on. We've all been people like that.
oh, totally. I just said that I was, but I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah,
I have people in mind too. I'm like, oh, so what do you
yeah,
do? Like,
yeah.
what do you have clients do? They're like, okay, I'm done with this. I didn't even know I kept telling the same story over and over.
Yeah, so those ahas, they really have to be handled so gently. And there are many processes that I use, like I outlined a second ago. That main process of awareness, detachment, alignment, and awe, that is the overarching process, right? But there are so many ways to get there. And I generally work with people in this uh very intimate way. I do have group programs, but in general, I work with people, even in group, in a very intimate way. So, what you need to get there is going to be a little different than what the next person needs. And there are so many ways to get to that thing. So, some of the things that are a great place to start are to calm your nervous system down, right? So I'll give you just something very simple so that you can make a start at home today, right? And that is, there is a hand gesture that will help you to sort of pull off a lot of anxiety out of the body, a lot of stress and worry out of the body, really help you to find that grounding, that calming, that moving yourself into the body. That's the sensation of it, right? Is that we're all kind of scattered around sometimes when we're upset or when we know things are going to trigger us. This is actually a tool that I started using when I was the general manager of a chain of furniture stores, and I had to switch tasks really really quickly. And the tasks that I was switching between were like high pressure buying decisions and high pressure customer service issues, right? So when you're making these massive changes and what's coming at you may not be good, right? Because they already went through three people before they got to me, and now they just want to yell for a little while, right? So to use this to channel energy away from the body and to allow yourself to stay in your body, it's going to change those triggers drastically, and it'll help you to be able to raise awareness so you're not just swept up in the energy of it. And it's this very simple hand gesture where you just take your hand like this and you fold in your last two fingers, right? So the two are pointing up, and you cover with your thumb your pinky and ring finger, right? And then you take this and you point it downward and put it by your side, right? You don't have to I just did that for the camera. Exactly.
That's a good
So
dance move.
what I love about this is you can do this when you're standing and nobody notices it. You can do this when you're sitting in a conference room and very, very rarely will anybody notice your hands, right? You can do this with one hand. You can do it with two hands. Of course, it's part of a whole system that if you were to quiet your mind and meditate and do some things, yes, of course, we could take it very far, that particular hand gesture, but it will help you in those emergency times. Between that, slowing down your breath, trying to stay present, then things are going to change drastically. And I find that with my clients, they are living a life where they often are able to handle the bumps externally. So nobody knows that there's a problem. They look great. Everything's going their way, right? But internally, there's another story happening.
Mhm.
And to get to that deep work of that last step, right? That's really the work that I do mostly with my clients. Yeah.
Yeah, and the difference between a happy life or just pretending, right? And those masks, they really wear on you. I mean, I kept mine up for a long time and I thought nobody could see that I was miserable behind it, but people knew. They just weren't saying anything. So yeah, I know what that's like. And it also, I believe, it degrades your trust in yourself, and you don't feel seen or accepted or loved for you.
Mm,
So it really, you're doing great work. I think it's brilliant. So thank you so much. We
thank
just
you.
have a few minutes left. I just wondered, is there anything that you want to share with the audience before I ask them where they can find you?
Yes. Yes. What I would say to you is you can have joy. You can have the fullness of joy. And even though every day doesn't prove that to you over and over and over again, right? Even though your experience may be contrary to that, there is a piece of you that knows when I say you can have joy if you prioritize joy, right? And if you don't prioritize joy, you will not get to that life that you really want. Instead, it will feel like you're watching a movie in your life, and you won't get to be fully present in it. So do that. Prioritize joy, whether you reach out to me or find another way to prioritize that joy and really find that space inside of you. Make sure you do it.
Ah, that's so beautiful. And I love in the description, you're saying like joy is a skill that can be learned.
Yeah,
And
that's
you
right.
give people a couple practical tools, but it's something, a skill is something you practice. You don't sit down at the piano for the first time and play a concerto, right? You get to practice it. I was
Yeah.
just telling my daughter's therapist today, she's 15, but she'll exercise for 2 days. She's like, it's not working. I'm not doing it anymore. And I'm like, it's a skill. You get to practice everything we want to get good at. We get to practice it.
Yeah, that's right. And emotional entrainment is a piece of that puzzle that is really, really important. Changes all the chemicals in the body.
Mm. Yeah. And it's so worth it. Think about, what I ask people if they're stuck in a situation they don't like in any way, especially emotionally, if you're unhappy, what is your life going to be like a year from now if you don't do anything differently? It probably won't even stay the same. It will get worse.
Mm,
So
mm.
what could it be like if you decide right now today to prioritize joy? What could
Yeah.
it be like 1 year from now? What would your life be like? What would the ripple effect of that be like? What about
What would
your
it be like
your
in a
relationship?
day? I mean,
Yeah,
your whole life can change so fast. Just one day. What would tomorrow be like if you just lean in and say, yeah, I'm having joy today. Not letting anything take me off of that.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. And it is a choice. It is a choice. Somebody cuts you off on the freeway, you have a choice. You can choose to love them and give them forgiveness, or you can choose to be angry. It's like, what do you want to reinforce? I choose love. I choose
There
love.
you go.
Believe the world is a kind, loving place. And guess what I experience? All kinds of that.
That's great.
So thank you so much, Donnalynn. This has been amazing. How can people find you?
Well, probably the best way is to go ahead and pick up my ebook at unbreakable.guide. You just type it in your browser like you would any other, any .com, and it's called unbreakable.guide. It's a great way to gain a bunch of those skills. I go through that tool that I went through here in depth. So that'll give you some skills. And of course, you can find me at my website, donnalynn.blog.
That blog.
Blog, yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, that's amazing. Well, I'm going to pick that up. Well, I'm really excited to read that. And thank you so much for watching Irresistible You Ignite Your Passion and Purpose. We will see you right here next week. Well, at least I will. All right, thanks.